Milovan is an independent curator, and Prem Sahib is a contemporary artist. They both have been working together and separately outside and inside of the traditional framework. Milovan curated the Italian pavilion at the 58th Venice Biennale in 2019 and directed for over a decade the Fiorucci Art Trust. As well, Milovan developed from 2011 until 2019 the annual Vulcano Extravaganza Festival in Stromboli, whose 2016 edition was titled I Will Go Where I Don't Belong. One of the topics in Prem's practices are the senses of belonging, alienation, and confinement. Sahib's work has been shown widely, including in the solo institutional exhibition Balconies, Kunstwerke in Hamburg 2017, and Sidon ICA London 2015, as well as numerous group shows. I'm delighted and privileged to be able to talk with them today because of the third edition of Clubs in which they participate. Welcome to our conversation. Hello, both. First of all, I'm delighted to be here with you in this digital space and format. And many thanks for your time speaking with me for class and for participating for this year's edition. Milovan as a curator and Prem as an artist. So let's start. Where are you now, Bob?
I am in Milan in my apartment. On the back, you can see some detail of my library, selection of my best book. There is also something about actually, I believe that there is also the book that Prem just published with also a short text by me about Chariot, isn't it?
Yes, well, it's about the Vault, which was one of the clubs that we went to together.
Okay, it's the Vault.
And I think maybe the first time I took you to a cruising club. So,
because all my space visit for exhibition with Prems actually happen to be very professional, but all the time late night, and all in this kind of like venue of the past, venues that are almost going to extinguish, as a cruising club, as a sauna, as like a kind of iconology and imagery that is like vanishing, and that Prem's in different work by him is trying to keep in the memory, to make them survive in some transposition, both video or painting or in different media. No?
Prem, where are you now? Are you in London?
Yes, I'm at home in London, and then in a few hours I'll be at the studio amongst some of the things that Milovan describes. So, my practice in the past has sometimes involved salvaging various objects from club spaces or cruising spaces. And actually, one of the things I currently have in my studio are some doors from a club that was in East London in Mile End called the Back Street, and it was London's oldest leather bar. And it was quite an assuming door, and behind that metal facade, there were these kind of metal and these wooden doors that I have in my studio now, currently covered in cobwebs and gaffer tape, and some signage that tell a bit of a history of that space and its past.
And how do you access to this information and to have those materials and to enter in those abandoned spaces and spaces that they are almost vanishing in the history? And another question is, where was this first visit of the cruising club? You just mentioned that you brought Milovan back in time. When and where was that?
So in that particular excursion, I think was maybe, when do you think, Milovan? Maybe around 2016?
I think that it was before. We can frame it because it was. I think it was quite early, because I imagining that it was before your exhibition at the ICA, because some of that kind of mattress that was useful in that cruising club was like taken by you and transformed it into art piece in the ICA. So the exhibition at the ICA, when it was exactly?
2015.
15. So I believe that it was 2015, 14 and 15. that we went to visit this club because of also some of the same actors came also to Stromboli in another open cinema that he realized with video, with sound, DJ, live DJ that he created, but also with sculptural element, posters that was like announcing this mysterious Arcan event gathering. And I remember that that night you brought me there, and actually we had like a kind of like difficulty time for them to let me in because it was like a only men club, and I was too feminine. You know how also this gay club can discriminate. So I had to really force the communication to get to be inside the club and actually honestly to see the surrounding because it was relevant for our collaboration for the trash text that I wrote later. And yes, I got even a drink, I believe, but
mentioned it was part of our research, and later we worked on a scent together. We made the smell of this place, so it was important. Thank you.
It was for like an exhibition that I curated within his research on sense and on smell inside the quarter of the Fiducia Trust when it was still operating in Sloane Avenue. And it was the exhibition, it was in 2016, I believe, just before we moved out and we changed the venue. And the title of the exhibition, I'm here, but you are still gone. Kind of like speculating on the idea that like a smell can survive longer than a presence. It can be like a memory of a presence.
It reminds me of the sense of Houston he made in the 70s. And in an interview or in an article, I think I read, they said that it smelled of leather, sex, and all these disco nights in Studio 54. How did your sense smell?
Well, it had two kind of registers. I think one that kind of allured you and one that repelled you. So there were many different tones. There was some sweat. There was a sweetness. There was even the smell of shit. It's like what clubs are made of, all these different smells, basically. So basically, and then also peppermint, things that smell a bit like disinfectant or chewing gum. So there was this idea of kind of intimacy as well as repulsion. So it was a strange smell. And I think I remember that we had it in the alleyway of the trust. So again, it kind of became this further liminal space that you walked through.
Because it was because there was like that court of the Fiducia Trust of the exhibition space was like an independent house, and there was also like a back entrance basically through a cat alley. And we decided to present a neon piece by Prem and the smell in this kind of like cat alley. But we forced people for the first and only time to enter from the back. So to really cross through this, it was like also nice as like different approach to the space, to the exhibition, entering from like another view.
We went straight ahead talking about chariots and your work. So I would like to ask you about what is chariots, and if you can talk more about the piece, both of you, and if you like to touch on it.
So Chariots was quite well-known gay sauna in London. It was there were many kind of branches. There was one in Waterloo, one in Dagenham, I think, and in Vauxhall, and the one in Shoreditch was the one that I used to go to quite a lot. And it had been there for about 20 years, so over 2 decades, in fact. And it was a place that I had a sort of autobiographical connection to, so somewhere that I'd grown up going to. I grew up in the suburbs of London, so when I used to come into central London to go clubbing, sometimes this is the sort of place I'd end up in. And I was just really interested in it as a place that was kind of where sex was part of the design, but it was also kind of this constructed environment that was designed for you to lose yourself in. So it was quite full of like labyrinth-like corridors and and booths that people could go in. And as Milovan mentioned, these kind of mattresses and all these different materials that really intrigued me and felt very unique to that place. And it kind of served an important role, I think, for the community of that part of East London. And I found it personally to be more kind of racially diverse and intergenerational than some of the gay bars in the neighborhood. So I was always really interested in somehow making work to do with that space. But because it's also a private and a public space, I was very conscious of not allowing the work I made to become some sort of titillating glimpse for an audience who aren't really part of that world. So prior to 2015, I was making work that maybe took certain aspects of that space and transformed them into material and formal qualities. So I was making sculptures that kind of were a bit like residues of my experience from that environment. But then in 2016, it closed, and I think I responded with some urgency because it was one of many closures of LGBT venues. I think there's something crazy, a crazy figure like 150 bars and clubs in London shut between 2000 and 2016. So really it felt like I needed to sort of respond urgently somehow. And when it closed, I knew people that were squatting the building. So I was able to come in, and very quickly it felt like it had changed. You know, all of a sudden, a space that I was familiar with and the community that I'm part of was familiar with became someone's bedroom or became another site for a party. And so myself and another photographer, Mark Blower, we were able to document the space. And I see the slideshow as a bit of a sort of social document in a way. It kind of sat a little bit outside of my work. I had made a lot of work with objects from the venue. So for instance, they were throwing out all the lockers, and I took 12 of the lockers to my studio, and I lived with them for about 8 months before I decided that that was a work. And through the paraphernalia that existed in the lockers, you kind of understood a narrative about the space. For instance, there were lots of stickers by gay street artists that I hadn't known about, or leaflets for sexual health services. And it drew attention for me to the fact that despite it being a sex venue, it was also a community space as well, and one where things like public health messages could be shared, or people could find out about housing associations and stuff like that. So yeah, the slideshow really is a kind of a collection of images that are quite confusing somehow, because you kind of never really know where you are in them. And they're a mixture of both the the Waterloo chariots and the Shoreditch chariots. And I have quite a funny story about the Waterloo chariots, because when I tried to go and take the pictures, the builders were already in, and I had to convince them to let me in to take pictures inside. And they said, "Oh, there's nothing here to photograph. There's just lots of holes in the wall." And obviously those were glory holes that they were referring to. And I was like, no, this is exactly what I want to take pictures of. So yeah, it was a task to get in there and document it, and very strange to see it in the light of day outside of the time that I used to go there, when it was so theatrically lit, and yeah, became this kind of fantasy space in a way.
Interesting. You just said that you responded of an urgency, and clubs is a response as well of an urgency of the pandemic. So the clubs were closed, and we decided to open them through a contemporary art expanded exhibition. And as you both work inside of the traditional framework of the art practices, and as well outside of it, I would like to ask you, maybe we can start with Milovan, how your experience does change when you work with institutions. For example, you created a very important national pavilion, the Italian pavilion in the Venice Biennial, and it is kind of the institution, and how it changed when you're outside of the traditional framework, and when you work in a different formats and shapes and concepts.
I mean, for example, I've been running a festival of contemporary art, performative art mainly, but not necessarily only
Vulcano Extravaganza
in Stromboli for 9 editions. Prem participated to 2 editions actually in 2018, but also in 2014, so within a distance of like 4 years. And that was more like happening on top of the volcano on a very dark beach, reachable only by boats, or otherwise in the vaporetto that bring you from Naples to Stromboli, or in the boat, night boat that bring you back, or otherwise in houses of the Strombolian, sometimes also like, how to say, prestigious inhabitant, as could have been Giovanni Anselmo, an artist from Arte Povera. Most of the time in the house of people that decided to live in Stromboli, that moved to Stromboli from several locations. That was happening mainly during the edition led by Camille Rowe, because I always been selecting one artist to co-curate it with me every edition. And the difference is that you are engaging with the audience in a different way. You cannot use the legitimation of art because you are not inside like a frame that allowed any manifestation to be recognized as artistic product, but you have really to engage on a different spectrum. Sometimes it's more challenging, sometimes it is more disturbing. I never found it difficult. I always found it more like a nice challenge, a challenge that I've been embracing several times in different occasions. Now I remember this occasion, but I can also mention with Paulino Losca, I did Microria Theater, which was like actually like trying to bring back to life an haunted house through all the different layer of the history of this eclectic house that we founded, wooden house in a small village near to the Black Forest of Poland. Prem participated also to one of the editions, but when an institution called Pivot decided to move this experience on the other side of the planet in Brazil, in Sao Paulo.
I think to sort of echo some of what Milovan's saying, like I kind of always like to think about how I engage with those different contexts, but I've been involved in so many projects that are also kind of outside those kind of orthodoxies in a way. So for instance, you know, during the pandemic, myself and another artist, George Henry Longley, along with others, ran a project space in his studio. And you know, that was the sort of time where, and a space where we could do things outside of maybe commercial institutional context. And it was more of a queer project space. And then I've been lucky enough to participate in projects that, you know, Milovan has arranged, which are always, I think, kind of ways to very challenging or thinking outside of the box. And then when I have been shown in institutional situations, I've also kind of thought about those frameworks in a way and how I can think about accessibility and kind of make something public facing. So I'm thinking about a work called Liquid Gold in particular, which was a light work that I made that kind of used its physicality to fill the space, and it always positioned viewers on the outside looking in. So yeah, I kind of like working across the board.
Great. And one of the topics you're working on is the sense of belonging. And Milovan, you just mentioned a chapter in Vulcano Extravaganza, which was titled, I Will Go There Where I Don't Belong. So we are as well conceiving the dance floor as a metaphor of the society. And I would like to ask you how the topic of belonging could be developed, thinking of the dance floor, and what is the culture of clubbing for both of you?
I want to say that actually I remember just now that one time I was also invited to curate the celebration of a birthday, which I found it in Monte Carlo. So it was like quite beautiful. I invite also Prem to contribute and actually contribute creating the dance floor.
Tell me about it.
Right. Please, Prem.
I made a large printed vinyl dance floor, and I'm very grateful for that invitation actually, because it kind of spurred another work that I made for the ICA. And at the time, I was interested in a lot of club histories, and I'd been quite geeky about that. I was reading about this club in New York. I can't even remember which one it was, like a very small one that didn't last for very long. And they used to lubricate the dance floor with talcum powder so that people could move more freely. And I really liked how, when I tried this in the studio, it kind of looked a bit like a kind of galaxy or something. And so I took a photograph of an earring on that floor and blew it up very large. So the earring was almost the size of the body on the dance floor, you know, in a kind of cosmos. And that spurred me to make an actual dance floor, or a sculpture at least, that was part of my ICA show in 2015. But yeah, clubs have been a sort of important part of my life and work. And I mean, I've met a lot of friends and collaborators through nightlife, especially in London and Berlin. And, you know, historically, they've also been a refuge for certain marginalized communities. So I think, you know, ideas of belonging are interesting for me to think about. However, I don't think so much about belonging myself in a way. I think there's always a sort of tension, because belonging sometimes is contingent on acceptance by a mainstream. And I think about my relationship to places like Chariots also kind of by problematizing them. So kind of growing up knowing that I always had an intuitive relationship to certain spaces, such as, you know, where I might find my community, if you like. In recent years, I've also tried to allow the work to become more critical as well, and to sort of maybe speak about the difficulties that exist in those spaces too. They're not always kind of queer utopias. Things that exist in the outside world still exist there as well, as Milovan and I have been talking about, these kind of challenging moments that we've had of entry for, you know, not being, you can't come in if you're not a man, or if you're dressed a certain way, or, you know, being the experience of being racialized in those spaces. So belonging is a really interesting question, but I try and sort of think not about me actually needing to belong or being given permission to belong, but what those spaces can offer, and how making work about them can also challenge.
Just like thinking about the title of this edition of Stromboli, because normally it's called Vulcano Extravaganza, but then every year there has been like a different title that was like kind of like following a different mood or suggestion or intuition of quotation. So one time it was Evil Under the Sun, another time Forget Amnesia. With Forget Amnesia, we was quoting the Amnesia Club also, but also the idea of forgetting that we forgot what we forgot. So a double kind of loss of memory. And then I Will Go Where I Don't Belong. It was exactly the edition of Camille Leroux, lead by Camille Leroux, and it was exactly the one that we was like kind of imagining ourselves in a spineless narrative, where you actually realize that you don't belong. You go and it is like a circle, so you don't belong anywhere, and you try to find new routes every step, every new location. And in that edition, we was using also both the clubs of Stromboli, because in one, the Tempers was performing, which was like close friends, musician of Camille, and the other one, the Mega, which is like a beautiful place because it is like a sort of like a amphitheater made of rocks on a beach outside of the village. So, you know, it was loud. It was like with the scenario of like an erupting volcano on top. And in that case, we invite Ragnar Kjarkansson to perform a series of music, and then Juliana Axtable to create a special DJ set. You know, just quoting some past momentum, quite memorable.
Which is a club night that I run with two other artists, with George Henry Longley and Eddie Peake. And it's a club that we began in London in 2011, but we've moved around and sort of done it globally. But it was the first time we've ever done it on a volcano, and probably the last is with Milovan's festival. So I think that was 2016 as well, perhaps. But yeah, right. And in this club, that's a natural amphitheater.
No, it was 2014. It was during Forget Amnesia. And this is the nightclub. It is Anal House Meltdown. No, right?
Exactly.
So if I understand well, you had like a pop-up nightclub, or not?
Yeah.
Like a movable, like a nomad nightclub.
Yes,
Prem.
it moves around in different venues. So we've done it in all sorts of cities, and but mostly in London. And like during the pandemic, we had a small pause, but now we've started it again. So we've had 4 this year, and we'll have 1 for New Year's Eve in London, in East London.
Great. And talking about the memory, I've been always very interested in rituals, and I would like to know if you do both exercise any daily ritual, like somehow keeping the infrastructure of your life.
I don't know if I've got the discipline to be as ritualistic as I would like, but I think most of the time I end up just sort of doom scrolling on my phone. But I think if I did have the time and the discipline, I would probably like to integrate scrying into my daily ritual, which is this kind of practice of staring into dark reflective surfaces to receive messages and divinations. And I've made a work using obsidian, going back to volcanoes. It's a volcanic glass, and it's a black mirror, similar to ones that I saw in Pompeii. Again, another project that Milovan produced. And Milovan also has one of these mirrors. So I think if I were to be disciplined enough to have a daily ritual, I'd probably like it to be scrying.
See, I've been using rituals a lot in my works, also in my curatorial. I've been working with many artists that has specific rituals to produce work. For example, Matilde Rosier or Chiara Fumai in the past, she now, and Delia Gonzalez, but even Paulino Losca. You know, the project Microria Theater normally start every edition within a ritual, the one of going to mushroom hunting. So instead of having like a presentation of the participant artists or intellectual around the table, each one within like their portfolio, we decide, me and Paulina, that we want to use the metaphor of the mushroom as like mycelium, like a ramificated kind of connected tissue that connect people, connect, you know, mushroom and the forest and the woods and the tree, but, you know, as a metaphor should have been connecting us as performators, creatures inside this project, and then theater, because we was quoting Grotowski and the Poor Theater, and the beginning of each edition was, I was saying before, you know, let's go to connect ourselves to a walk in the wood for one day and one night.
And Milovan, you just mentioned Paulina Losca, and she's saying in an interview that you possess unique fearlessness. Do you feel identified with what she's saying? And as well, Prem is describing in an interview that you mix up energies that no one is doing. So this is making you so unique in your approach of curating. And in another interview, you're saying about yourself that you as a curator, you seem like a choreographer. So can you a little bit explain your curatorial practices, please?
I agree with all of this definition. I mean, I like the idea of like bringing energy and like connecting energy and coordinating movement of energy in space and in time.
This is very beautiful, and this is very much claps. How you both imagine the museum of the future? Do you think that we have to reinvent the rules, or we are okay as we are right now?
No, I think that we have to reinvent. Maybe through the experience of this unconventional project, a different platform, not legitimized, maybe bring more energy, more life inside the museum. Sometimes I've been, you know, there are great exhibitions, but I've been visiting museums that are like desolated lands. Through the experience of like this unconventional project, maybe we can reinvigorate, revitalize, fertilize the institution, some of the institution.
Thank you. Prem?
I agree. I think we need some revival, and like some of what Milovan brings with the, you know, the kind of movement of energy and the bringing of this energy into what can sometimes be a dead space. But I also think that the museums of the future should definitely be free. That's another thing I feel quite strongly about.
I have to say that we have free entrance for this year's edition of CLAP. It was something we really insisted for because it's a
Amazing.
culture for the city. So yeah,
It's been great to talk, and I hope the event goes well. I look forward to seeing images.